A ruling so powerful, it shook the foundation of American law, and almost no one saw it coming. While headlines obsessed over politics and celebrity drama, something far more important unfolded inside the Supreme Court. In an extraordinary and unanimous decision, the justices rewrote the legal playbook on one of the most critical protections you have under the Constitution. It wasn't about a technical loophole. It wasn't a minor policy tweak. This decision directly changes how every citizen, especially those who legally own and carry, may be treated during any encounter with law enforcement. The case was Barnes versus Felix, a tragedy at its core, but what the court decided reaches far beyond that single event. For the first time in decades, they rejected the narrow rules lower courts had relied on and replaced them with a standard that demands full context and full accountability. And here's why this matters to you. From a traffic stop to a knock at your door, the way your actions and the actions of those in authority are judged has just changed nationwide. Today on Survival Firearms, we're breaking this down step by step so you know exactly what the court ruled and why it matters to you, how this could reshape self-defense cases, and the critical details every responsible citizen must understand going forward. 1. The story of Barnes versus Felix. At the heart of this landmark case is a rapid, tragic confrontation. Officer Robert Felix Jr. initiated a traffic stop on Ashton Barnes, suspected of toll violations. Initially, things appeared routine. Felix instructed Barnes to step out of the vehicle. Barnes complied at first, but in a sudden turn, he attempted to drive away. Reacting instinctively, Felix stepped onto the driver's side door ledge. Within 2 seconds, he fired 2 shots into the moving car. Barnes was struck and fatally wounded. The entire sequence from the car's movement to the fatal shots unfolded in roughly 5 seconds. In the aftermath, Barnes's mother filed a lawsuit, claiming that her son's Fourth Amendment rights were violated through the use of excessive force. The central legal question became, was Officer Felix's response lawful under the circumstances? And more importantly, what standard should courts apply to decide that? Part 2. The moment of threat standard. For decades, especially in the Fifth Circuit, courts followed what's known as the moment of threat rule. Under this doctrine, judges examine only the exact instant force was used, ignoring what happened before or after. If an officer claimed they felt threatened in that brief moment, the action was generally considered justified. That's precisely what happened here. Both the District Court and the Fifth Circuit sided with Felix, ruling that the 2 seconds in which he clung to the moving car were enough to justify deadly force. But there was a glaring flaw. Context was left out entirely. What led Felix to step onto the vehicle? Could the situation have been diffused earlier? Were Barnes's actions truly dangerous or misinterpreted? Under the moment of threat approach, those questions were off limits, something the Supreme Court found deeply troubling. Part 3. The Supreme Court's rejection of narrow analysis. In a unanimous 9-0 decision authored by Justice Elena Kagan, the court decisively struck down the moment of threat doctrine. Instead, they ruled that the totality of the circumstances must be used to judge excessive force claims under the Fourth Amendment. That means the entire chain of events is relevant, not just the final seconds. Officers' choices and actions before the use of force are part of the equation. Courts must assess whether the force was objectively reasonable from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, not in hindsight. The opinion stressed, the totality of the circumstances inquiry has no time limit. Earlier facts may show why an officer would view ambiguous conduct as threatening or as harmless. In other words, context matters. This sets a new national precedent for how excessive force cases are evaluated, affecting every citizen law enforcement interaction going forward. Part 4. Why this matters to gun owners. You might be wondering, what does this ruling have to do with the Second Amendment? The answer, everything. Legal gun owners increasingly face high-stakes encounters with law enforcement. Maybe it's a routine traffic stop where you inform an officer you're carrying legally. Maybe it's a home visit tied to a red flag order or mistaken identity. In these situations, force can escalate quickly, and until now, courts often looked only at the final instant, ignoring everything that led up to it. This decision changes that. Judges can now review the full sequence, including whether lawful actions were misunderstood as threatening. For gun owners, that difference is monumental. It can mean the line between being unjustly blamed for a tragedy and having a court recognize that your rights were violated. This ruling brings the Fourth Amendment's protections into direct alignment with the Second Amendment's safeguards. Part 5. The Totality of Circumstances, a new legal framework. The Supreme Court didn't just throw out an outdated doctrine, they replaced it with something stronger. By adopting a totality of the circumstances standard, the court created a more balanced method for reviewing police use of force cases. Now, both sides of the story, what the officer perceived and what occurred, must be weighed together. Here's what's now required. Courts must examine the full timeline of events, not just the closing moments. Officers can no longer justify force solely on perceived danger if that perception was shaped by earlier poor decisions. Prior interactions, behavioral patterns, verbal exchanges, and attempts at de-escalation all become legally relevant. This is a game changer for how self-defense claims, wrongful shootings, and legal firearm owner encounters will be litigated. It restores fairness to Fourth Amendment protections in the modern age. Part 6. Repercussions for state and federal courts. This wasn't a gentle correction for the Fifth Circuit. It was a direct challenge to how multiple circuits have approached excessive force cases for years. Some courts embraced versions of the moment of threat rule. Others used broader standards, but applied them unevenly. A unanimous decision changes that. With this ruling, every court is now on notice. Context is not optional, it's constitutional. What happens next is both practical and sweeping. Pending cases get a second look. Trial courts will need to reassess excessive force claims using the full context standard, not a freeze-frame analysis. Older appeals may come back to life. Litigants whose cases were dismissed under narrow doctrines can argue for reconsideration because the legal yardstick has changed. Pattern instructions and policies will shift. Appellate guidance, jury instructions, and internal court manuals will be updated to reflect totality of circumstances review. Qualified immunity outcomes may change. When the underlying constitutional standard broadens, the analysis of whether an officer's conduct violated clearly established law can shift with it. Precedents will realign nationwide. Future opinions will cite this case as controlling authority, harmonizing circuits that previously diverged. In plain terms, this decision is actively reshaping federal jurisprudence across all 50 states. Attorneys representing victims of overreach now have a Supreme Court-approved framework. Context must be considered. That singular mandate revives arguments once thought unwinnable and reorients how courts separate reasonable action from unconstitutional force. Part 7. The gun owner's reality check. If you're a gun owner, here's the reality. You are more likely than most to have structured interactions with law enforcement, traffic stops, range or hunting checks, wellness or address visits, even calls triggered by a misunderstanding. In these moments, seconds feel like pressure cookers, and choices on both sides matter. This ruling levels the legal field by requiring courts to evaluate the entire sequence of an encounter, not just a split second. That empowers citizens to challenge wrongful conduct without being boxed out by a narrow snapshot rule. Attorneys to argue from the full record, pre-encounter communication, de-escalation efforts, positioning, commands, and responses. Judges to demand accountability where escalation was avoidable or context was misread. This doesn't brand all uses of force as unlawful. It raises the standard for justification and insists on looking at how the situation developed. For concealed carriers and those who lawfully open carry, the takeaway is simple and critical. Your lawful conduct and the officer's decisions leading up to force both count. That long overdue symmetry means a lawful disclosure, a visible holster, or calm compliance should no longer be treated as presumptively threatening when the broader context says otherwise. Practical reality: keep communications clear, hands visible, and follow lawful instructions, because now the record of those moments will matter in court just as much as the final instant. Part 8. The role of the Second and Fourth Amendments. Together. For years, discussions treated these protections as separate lanes: the Second Amendment about lawful carry, the Fourth Amendment about searches, seizures, and force. This ruling draws the lines together in a way that benefits responsible citizens. Here's the connection in plain English. Second Amendment protects the right to own and carry, consistent with applicable laws. Fourth Amendment protects you from unreasonable searches, seizures, and force, including when you are carrying lawfully. Your right to bear arms is only meaningful if exercising that right doesn't become a shortcut to being treated as inherently dangerous. By requiring courts to examine the full context, this decision pushes back against the idea that lawful carry by itself tips the scale toward force. Instead, it asks, what actually happened? What did each party communicate? Were lawful actions misread? Did earlier choices escalate tension unnecessarily? The result is a more accurate constitutional lens. Lawful possession or carry cannot be used as a blanket justification for force unless the full circumstances support it. That is a practical shield every gun owner should understand, and a historic convergence of two core protections working together the way they were meant to. Part 9. What this means going forward. The road ahead is substantial. Legal commentators are already treating this as a watershed ruling for use of force cases, one that changes how the Constitution operates in real encounters, not just in textbooks. Expect concrete shifts. Training and tactics will adapt. Agencies will emphasize pre-force decision-making, scene management, and communication. Knowing courts will scrutinize the full timeline. Policy and supervision will tighten. Departments, municipalities, and insurers will update policies, after-action reviews, and body camera evaluation protocols to reflect the new standard. Advocacy will evolve. Gun rights advocates and civil liberties groups now share a powerful common tool, the mandate that context governs. Litigation posture will change. More cases will survive early dismissal, discovery will matter more, and summary judgments based on narrow snapshots will be harder to sustain. And by speaking 9-0, the court sent a message. This isn't about politics, it's about the Constitution. That unanimity signals stability. It invites courts, agencies, and citizens to recalibrate now, not later. If this is the start of a new era, it's one where police powers are better bound by reasonableness, rights are weighed in full, and citizens are evaluated by what actually happened, not a single frame frozen in time. This wasn't just another court case, it was a constitutional course correction. Barnes v. Felix makes one thing clear: your rights don't vanish in a moment of tension. From now on, the full story matters, not just a split second taken out of context. For citizens, that means stronger protection. For those in authority, it means higher accountability. And for the justice system, it's a reminder that convenience can't replace the Constitution. If this decision matters to you, and it should, here's what to do next. Share this with someone who needs to understand their rights. Drop a comment below. Will this ruling make encounters safer, or are you still concerned? Stay informed, stay prepared, and stay free. We'll see you in the next one.